Eddie and Jessica were young lovers who were driving home from a friend's house one night when they saw a strange light in the sky. As they got closer, they saw that it was a giant, gaping anus hovering just below the clouds. Both Eddie and Jessa became overwhelmed by a deep primal fear, and Eddie pulled over onto the side of the road.
"What was that?"
asked Jessica. But before Eddie could answer, the gaping anus let out a tremendous fart, so loud that it shook the car. The stench was unbearable, and the car's windows fogged up from the gas. Then 4 shadowy men descended from the gaping anus and surrounded the car. There was something terrifying about their blank, featureless faces. They began to bang on the car windows with pale, bony hands. Eddie and Jessica were terrified, and the car's windows shattered. The men dragged them out of the car, and they all floated back into the anus. Then the anus sealed shut. The 4 shadowy men were the servants of the Anus King. They took Eddie and Jessica and brought them to the throne room deep within the floating anus. The Anus King was a giant, bloated creature with a huge, gaping anus. He was surrounded by a chorus of flatulent demons that laughed when they saw the terror in Eddie and Jessica's eyes. The Anus King had his servants take Eddie and tie him down to an enormous buttock-shaped altar. The Anus King then straddled the altar and slowly lowered his ass over Eddie's face. Eddie and Jessica both screamed in horror as the rank vapors lofting from the Anus King's gaping hole distorted the light around Eddie's head. And with that, the Anus King began to fart. The deafening sound was more like an enormous avalanche than the breaking of wind. The force of this flatulence was so great that it melted Eddie's face and tore his body apart. The Anus King laughed as Eddie died a humiliating and painful death. Then he turned his attention to Jessica. He could see the terror in her eyes, but he also saw desire. He knew that she wanted him, even though she was afraid.
"Welcome, Jessica,"
said the Anus King, his voice reverberating like 1,000 farts within his vast chamber.
"I can sense your desire, Jessica. You want to know what it is like to be consumed by me, to feel my power."
Jessica could feel her body responding to the Anus King's words. She could feel a throbbing sensation between her legs, and her nipples were hardening.
"Yes,"
she whimpered, closing her eyes.
"Submit to me, Jessica. Let me show you the true power of my anus."
As his farting became louder and more persistent, Jessica felt herself becoming lightheaded. She opened her eyes and saw the Anus King's huge, gaping anus right in front of her face. Jessica tried to back away, but she was transfixed by the Anus King's hideous form. He was so close to her now that she could see into the black void of his anus. She could feel his rank breath on her face, and she wanted to vomit, but she also couldn't look away. The Anus King grabbed Jessica and pulled her close. She fought against him, but she was no match for his strength. He held her tightly as he lowered his buttocks over her face. She screamed in horror as she was enveloped by the Anus King's foul gas. But then she felt something else. She felt the Anus King thrusting into her mouth. At first she resisted, but then she realized that she wanted this. She wanted to be taken by the Anus King, and so she submitted. She surrendered herself to the Anus King's hideous desire and blacked out. The next thing she remembered was smelling smoke and seeing flashing red and blue lights. She came to on the side of the road in nothing but her underwear.
"Was it all a dream? The Anus King?"
she wondered as she sat up. One thing was for sure, Eddie was dead. She could see his char-broiled body smoldering in the wreckage of what used to be his car. "We have a survivor!" yelled a firefighter. Jessica was rushed to the ER, where the doctors were amazed to find that she was completely unharmed by the accident. The only unusual thing about Jessica's physical state was that her anus was dilated, but the doctor put that down to a psychosomatic response to the trauma of the accident. It was a somber occasion. It was only a week and a half after the accident. Jessica stood at Eddie's grave, tears streaming down her face. It was hard to believe that he was gone. They had been through so much together, but also she felt guilty. She knew she should be mourning her dead boyfriend, but all she could think about was the Anus King. She didn't even believe he was real, but she shivered in pleasure at the thought of him. She tried to shake the thoughts from her head, but they kept coming back. She thought about the way his huge, intense, gaping anus had looked right in front of her face, the way his rank breath had smelled, the smell of his farting, and the way his anus was looking at her, like a smoldering eye burning with passion. She thought about the way he had felt thrusting into her mouth. She felt herself getting aroused at the thought, and she had to fight back the urge to masturbate.
Why do I desire the Anus King?
Thought Jessica.
He's only a figment of my imagination.
It was too much. She turned and ran from the graveyard crying, overcome with guilt and shame. And even though she denied it, deep down inside, Jessica knew that the Anus King had taken her virginity and that she would never be the same. Jessica started to feel sick in the mornings, and she knew something was up. She went to the doctor to get a checkup, and the doctor told her that she was pregnant. At first she was scared and didn't know what to do, but then she started to feel excited. She knew that Eddie's parents would be thrilled to know that she was carrying their late son's child. Eddie's mother and father were over the moon when they found out that Jessica was pregnant. They were so excited to be getting a grandchild, and they treated her like she was family. Jessica was happy to be able to give them this gift, but she couldn't help but to feel a little uneasy, especially after the dream. In the dream, Jessica was in a dark, cavernous chamber. She was lying on a cold, hard surface, and she could feel something moving inside of her. She was in pain, and she wanted it to stop. But then she saw the Anus King. He was standing over her, and he was smiling. There was something different about him. He was holding a baby in his arms, and then Jessica realized that the baby was her own. She was horrified as she stared into the black void of the Anus King's gaping anus. The baby was crying, and Jessica could feel its terror. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't make a sound. Jessica was paralyzed by fear, and then the Anus King spoke.
You are mine forever.
Again, Jessica tried to scream, but she couldn't. She was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The Anus King's eyes seemed to bore into her soul, and she felt herself being pulled into the black void of his anus. She looked down and saw that the Anus King had ripped her open. Her intestines were spilling out, and the Anus King was slowly pulling them out of her body. Jessica could feel herself being pulled into the Anus King's gaping anus. She was falling into darkness. Then, with the immense loudness of 1,000 ass-shaped storm clouds, the Anus King's voice thundered,
Jessica!
And she woke up. Eddie's parents threw Jessica a baby shower to celebrate the impending arrival of their grandchild. Everything was going well, and Jessica was enjoying herself. Every time she looked at the ever-growing stack of presents, she would start to tear up, thinking about how kind the people around her were. "Attention, everyone, attention!" Eddie's father yammered as he tapped a spoon against the rim of his wine glass. "As you all know, my wife and I were devastated by the untimely death of our beloved son Eddie last winter. But just as the Lord takes, He gives too. And not only has the Lord given us a grandchild, but also a daughter too. Jessica, I would like you to know that you can live with us, and that my wife and I have turned Eddie's old room into a nursery." Jessica was speechless. Eddie's parents were about to show off the nursery to Jessica, but then it happened. It started as an awkward silence. Everyone knew something horrible was about to take place. Then the silence built up to a low rumble and kept building. Within moments, the windows were rattling so loudly that it seemed that they would shatter. Soon the whole house was shaking violently. Family photos began falling off the walls. Knickknacks and things toppled off of shelves. One man was bracing himself against a wall, as if the house was about to fall down on him.
It's as if the earth itself is breaking wind.
The man yelled over the commotion. Then it suddenly stopped.
"No!"
Jessica shrieked as she was blinded by the bright light spilling out from the sliding glass door.
"It can't be! He is not real!"
Another guest was looking out the back window, and he exclaimed,
It's a huge flying anus. Look at the anus.
Upon hearing this, Jessica felt her heart had diarrheaed its way into her butt and spilled out onto the floor.
I see it too. A floating anus. And look, I see an anus man floating out from within the floating anus.
"It's just like the night of the car crash."
Jessica thought to herself, as four shadowy men walked into the room, seemingly through the walls.
It couldn't have been real. It was only a dream.
Jessica's heart was pounding. The four shadowy men took all the baby shower gifts and left. Then, as if some air held under a considerable amount of pressure escaped some organ, a loud pop was heard, and the Ennis King appeared.
No, no, no. This is not happening. This is not real. I am dreaming. I must be dreaming.
Jessica tried to convince herself as the Ennis King approached her. "What the hell are you?" Eddie's father yelled to the Ennis King. The Ennis King turned to him, and with the most shit-eating grin imaginable, the Ennis King replied in a deep, guttural voice.
I am the Anus King. I am here to receive my baby shower gifts.
Then, with an immense reverse fart, Eddie's father was pulled into the Ennis King's gaping anus. There was a sickening crunch as Eddie's father's body was mutilated and crushed within the giant colon. His screams echoed throughout the cavernous bowels until they were finally cut off by the Ennis King's sphincter. Then he turned his attention back to Jessica. He came closer and closer until he was standing right in front of her.
You are mine.
The Ennis King said in a booming voice. Jessica was paralyzed with fear.
Tell them the truth. Tell them you lost your virginity to the Anus King.
He demanded. Jessica tried to speak, but she couldn't.
No, no.
Jessica stammered.
I can't.
The Ennis King was now getting angry.
Tell them.
He demanded, but Jessica was too scared. She was paralyzed with fear. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She was frozen in place. The Ennis King was getting angrier by the second.
Fine.
The Ennis King said,
If you won't tell them, then I will.
And with that, the Ennis King farted a loud, ferocious fart right in Jessica's face. The smell was unbearable, and Jessica started to feel lightheaded. She tried to hold her breath, but she couldn't. As she passed out and her pregnant body went limp, she fell into the Ennis King's arms.
She is mine.
He proclaimed.
This is my queen.
Then the Ennis King and an unconscious Jessica ascended into the Ennis King's giant floating anus through the back door, never to be seen again. One final note. According to local police, an investigation found that many of the baby shower gifts were returned at a local Target in exchange for Target gift cards, which were then in turn sold on a deep web gift card marketplace for a cryptocurrency known as Monero. The people returning the gifts were described as men of a shadowy and featureless complexion,